All right, let's dive right into this explainer and unpack the deeply fascinating yet completely dark history of America's most historic prison, Eastern State Penitentiary. Picture this. Right in the middle of Philadelphia sits this massive castle-like structure. Believe it or not, it was actually built as a noble utopian experiment. The goal? Genuine reform. But over its 142 years of operation, it morphed into something entirely different. A site of immense human suffering, incredibly daring escapes, and eventually one of the most famous haunted hotspots in the entire country. We're going to break down exactly how a facility built on such good intentions became a literal symbol of psychological torment and how it's being completely reimagined today.
To give you an idea of just how intense this place was, listen to what Charles Dickens had to say way back in 1842. He visited this internationally renowned facility, and man, he did not mince words. He called the system a slow and daily tampering with the mysteries of the brain. Think about that. Dickens recognized early on that the sheer isolation inflicted on these inmates was causing profound mental damage. It really sets the grim tone for everything we're about to explore here.
So let's start with part 1, a palace for penitents. We really need to understand the utopian experiment that birthed this imposing fortress in the first place.
When you look at the layout from above, it's this massive hub-and-spoke pinwheel. Architect John Haviland designed this in 1829, and it was an absolute marvel of modern engineering. I mean, it had central heat and flush toilets before the White House even had them. Crazy, right? But the design wasn't just to show off, it was hyper-functional. Those radiating cell blocks meant a single guard standing right in the center rotunda could monitor every single corridor at the exact same time. The layout was so revolutionary that over 300 prisons worldwide ended up copying it.
The whole driving force behind this setup came from early Philadelphia Quakers and reformers. They genuinely believed that total sensory deprivation and silence would inspire deep regret and penitence. Fun fact, that's actually where we get the word penitentiary. But to achieve that level of penitence, the isolation had to be absolute. If an inmate absolutely had to leave their cell, guards threw a hood over their heads so they couldn't see or be seen. No visits, no letters from home, zero talking. Guards even wore fabric over their shoes to muffle their footsteps. Can you imagine? It created this incredibly heavy, eerie silence across the entire facility.
And the cells themselves? They were built with these high, vaulted, church-like ceilings. The only natural light filtering in came from a single skylight way up above, which was ominously called the Eye of God. The intent was basically to force the prisoner to look upward, hopefully fostering deep religious contemplation. But as we know today, prolonged isolation and zero human contact doesn't usually lead to enlightenment. It usually drives the human mind straight toward madness.
Which brings us to Section 2, the horror of solitary. Let's look at how this noble ideal quickly descended into total darkness.
The contrast here is just staggering. The original founders wanted to avoid the horrific public physical tortures of the 1700s, things like public floggings. But ironically, that attempt just evolved into hidden, horrific punishments behind high stone walls. If an inmate broke that strict rule of silence, the retribution was brutal. Guards used something called the mad chair, binding an inmate so tightly they couldn't even move, cutting off circulation for days. Or, in the dead of winter, they used water baths. Inmates were dunked in ice-cold water and hung on a wall outside overnight until their skin literally froze. Just horrifying.
To really bring this grim reality home, let me tell you about Matthias Tecumseh. He was serving time for manslaughter back in 1833, and he made the fatal mistake of just trying to communicate with the guy in the next cell. The guards caught him and slapped on the iron gag. This medieval-sounding device was an iron collar clamped into the mouth and chained to the hands behind the back. If you moved at all, it violently pulled on your tongue. Well, Tecumseh was found dead in a cell just an hour later. He had literally bled to death from his tongue tearing. It's a stark, terrifying reminder of just how deadly the prison's enforced silence really was.
Moving on to part 3, famous inmates and escapes. Because you can't have a historic prison without some highly notorious names.
The thing is, no matter how secure the fortress is, human desperation will always look for a way out. Take the legendary bank robber Slick Willie Sutton. In 1945, he orchestrated this massive, audacious breakout, digging a 100-foot tunnel right under the prison walls with 11 other guys. They were quickly recaptured, but still, what an effort. Then there's Leo Callahan. Back in 1923, he and 5 others built a makeshift ladder and scaled those massive walls. His buddies got caught, but Callahan actually managed to get away. To this day, he remains the only person to escape Eastern State and never be found. Kinda wild, right?
Now, in absolute stark contrast to the torture that most inmates faced, we have notorious Chicago mob boss Al Capone. He spent 8 months here after getting busted on a weapons charge in 1929. But Capone didn't suffer. He lived in absolute luxury on cell block 9, a stretch that actually became known as Park Avenue. While other guys were freezing in barren, silent cells, Capone was hanging out with a cabinet radio, fine French furniture, expensive rugs, and actual oil paintings. The disparity in treatment is just unbelievable.
And that leads us perfectly into Section 4, America's Most Haunted Prison. Let's talk about the paranormal legacy.
We have to ask the multi-million-dollar question here, the one that draws thousands of tourists, ghost hunters, and TV crews every single year. Do the tortured spirits of the past actually linger in these crumbling cell blocks? It's widely considered to be one of the most haunted locations in America, with researchers consistently claiming to capture hard evidence of the afterlife.
And the reports are really specific, corroborating each other for decades, going all the way back to the 1940s. You've got visitors and staff reporting echoing voices and random cackling down cell block 12. In the 90s, a locksmith named Gary Johnson claimed he was gripped so tightly by an unseen force in cell block 4 that he couldn't move. Over in cell block 6, multiple people have reported shadowy figures darting along the walls. Even the professional investigators from the show Ghost Hunters caught footage of a black shadow rushing the camera, along with thermal anomalies they literally couldn't explain.
What's crazy is that even a ruthless crime boss couldn't escape the heavy psychological weight of this place. Despite all that luxury in his cell, Al Capone was reportedly terrified at night. Guards used to hear him letting out these blood-curdling screams in the pitch dark, begging someone named Jimmy to just leave him alone. A lot of people think this was the ghost of James "Jimmy" Clark, one of the victims of Capone's St. Valentine's Day massacre. Whether it was a literal ghost or just intense guilt and isolation completely breaking his mind, Capone actually hired a medium after his release to try and rid himself of the specter.
Finally, we arrive at Section 5, Rethinking Dark Tourism. Let's look at the modern reckoning happening at the site today.
For years, the prison's massive, foreboding facade was home to an event called Terror Behind the Walls. It was a hugely lucrative Halloween haunted house, packed with zombie inmates, buckets of fake blood, and cheap jump scares. And yeah, it brought in massive revenue to help preserve the crumbling ruins. But it leaned incredibly hard into the spooky, salacious entertainment side of prison tourism.
But eventually, there is a shift. Museum VP Sean Kelly perfectly captured the mood when he noted that the whole subject of incarceration just isn't a source of amusement anymore. The museum made a very conscious, impartial pivot away from that voyeuristic gore. With national conversations around criminal justice reform growing louder, they decided that exploiting a site of actual historical human suffering with zombie actors just didn't feel right anymore. So they dropped the gore. Instead, they shifted focus entirely toward the educational realities of the carceral system. A huge part of this shift includes some incredibly powerful site-specific art installations. Take Cindy Stockton Moore's piece, Other Absences. It respectfully centers the victims of crime by displaying portraits of 50 individuals who were killed by former inmates of the penitentiary. It's a sobering exhibit that ensures the wrongfully injured and their families are vividly present in the broader conversation. It's a stark reminder that criminal justice is deeply complex, constantly trying to balance the rehabilitation of the incarcerated with the permanent grief of the victims. Walk through the exhibits today, and that modern educational focus is everywhere. You'll see a massive 16-foot steel sculpture called The Big Graph, which visually charts the U.S.'s incredibly high rate of mass incarceration compared to the rest of the world. Old hospital wards now hold exhibits breaking down how infectious diseases, from tuberculosis to COVID-19, spread through prison populations. The museum is taking its deeply dark history and using it to spark genuine, critical dialogue about reform and the future of the American penal system. As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a final, provocative thought to ponder. Eastern State Penitentiary really forces us to look in the mirror. It asks us, why are we so inherently drawn to sites of human suffering? And is it actually possible to consume the dark history of a place like this without minimizing the very real, very raw human pain that happened inside those walls? Think about that next time you visit a historical site. Thanks so much for exploring this with me today, and keep questioning the history around.